Hello and welcome everyone to Feature Friday. There we go. Technology is great whenever it works. So we are doing a little session today, Peter and myself, talking about better coordination with Navisworks and BIM Track. Before we hop in, a little housekeeping. There's going to be time for a live Q&A when we get to the end. You're also welcome to type your questions into the comments section as we're going. And as we're doing this, we'll try to get some of them answered live as we move forward. The session is being recorded. It will be available later. And once this session is over, you can come visit. I have myself in the expo, but Peter will be joining us for a while as well to learn more about BIM Track and to see a demo. And with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So a brief agenda. There's going to be some introductions for myself and Peter. And then we're going to hop into a traditional workflow with Navisworks and some of the issues that entails when you're trying to track issues with just that typical workflow. We'll then kick it up a notch and show you how we can add BIM Track to that workflow and make things a little bit easier. And we'll finish off with some tips and tricks integrating into those two workflows. And of course, we'll finish up with questions. So my name is Carl Storms. I'm the technical solutions lead here at BIM Track. It's always awkward to introduce yourself. That's why I always make sure I have this handy dandy slide available so people know who I am. A little background, I am an architectural technologist, and in my 20 plus years in the industry, I've done a little bit of everything, which makes me perfectly suited to be Peter's partner in crime for this session to make sure that we get all the color commentary in place, with Peter really being the driving force. Before we hop in to introduce Peter, a quick overview of what BIM Track, the platform, is. And I do really mean quick. And the reason being is, of course, right after you can all come and join me in the expo and get the full meal deal of what BIM Track is. What I do like to talk about is our ever-growing and expanding ecosystem. So these are some of the great products that we integrate with. You can see all the Autodesk products and some of our most recent additions like VR Collab and Spectar, Enscape, really getting into being able to take your workflow and use it the way you want and making sure that we have all that information for you. And that just leads down to how BIM Track can help you on your next project. Really, we help you with all your issues. We manage those issues. We put them in a location where you can easily find them. We allow all your designers to take that single click and be taken directly to their issue and make sure they can fix it quickly in their authoring tool of choice. One central location based in the cloud so you can access your issues wherever you need them on whatever device you want. And of course, we have the ability to make sure that all of these problems, all these risks are mitigated because we know where to find them. Now, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Peter. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Carl. Just to give you guys a quick background of who I am, I've been in the industry for about 25 years. I've been doing CAD management for that long and eventually into BIM management. So let's continue on. A quick overview of Reinders. We are a construction company, general contractors. We have offices across Canada. We do a lot of different types of projects, a lot of wastewater treatment plants and different buildings. Here's some information for us about our company. Here's some of the services that we offer and some of our value-added services that we also offer. And here's a couple of photos of some of our past projects. So let's get into the main coordination presentation about Navisworks and BIM Track. So let's talk about Revit and Navisworks. So Navisworks is a model aggregator software that is used for bringing models from different platforms. So today we're going to focus just really on Revit. So let's talk about the use of Navisworks. The first thing you would do is to set up a 3D view in your model. So let's say you have a typical team for a project. You might have structural, architectural, and mechanical, electrical engineering firms, and they're working in Revit. And you would have one BIM coordinator that would be responsible for creating a Navisworks workflow class report on a weekly basis, typically. And so everybody in the team would need to set up in their model a 3D view. And in that 3D view, it would just be the model information that they were responsible for their scope of work. So they would not have any links, and they would just show in that view what they want to share in Navisworks. So you can create a view template as well in Revit, so you can apply that. So occasionally you want to make sure that nobody has changed that view. It's quick and easy to make sure that it's going to be set up correctly. And then you would set up your Navisworks export settings, and then you would export out a Navisworks NWC file with the plugin. So there are some settings that you definitely wanted to, the team would need to agree on. And the number one important item there is the shared coordinates there. There's two different options for exporting out of Navisworks from Revit, and that is project internal or shared. So typically the architect or the lead BIM consultant would then set up shared coordinates for a project, and then everybody would then acquire those coordinates and make sure that when they link in their models and when they're exporting out of Navisworks, that they use shared coordinates. A couple other items to note here that are important to note is what you're going to export. So the two options there, you definitely want to have current view, the view that you've set up when you're exporting it out, because the other option is the entire model. So there might be other information that you're not quite ready to share, or it might be other information that you don't really need. So typically you would turn off all of your annotation graphics and maybe CAD links and other things that you might be using for internal coordination or tracing over top of or converting to Revit. So the next part would be everybody would need to have some type of a file share site that they would upload those NWC files, and then the main BIM coordinator would then collect all those NWC files and create a master NWF file. And then inside that NWF file from Navisworks, they link it. It's kind of like AutoCAD where you link in XREFs. That's what an NWC files get linked into an NWF file. And in that NWF file, that's the master file that you would create the search sets, apply some color profiles to different things so you can see some different colors for different systems. And then you would then create and run your class tests. So just a little bit about that. If I switch over to my network directory here. So I have a sample data set here that is actually a copy of the Autodesk data set. That's the school that's in every Revit install. So I've gone through and we've created a bunch of different models for those. So these are the RVT files that we're using for this demonstration. So typically then you would open these files up in Revit and export out your views. So here's the typical Navisworks NWC files. And then they are all linked into the master NWF file that I have here. So in Navisworks, you'd be setting up some search sets. So I can talk a little bit about how to create search sets, but there's lots of YouTube videos and training materials on the web about what a search set is versus a search selection set and how to create them. And so I've gone through and I've created a lot of different search sets to pull different information into those sets. And then we would be using those sets for applying colors in the Navisworks model. So we can have some differentiation in terms of mechanical, electrical, and structural for this demonstration.
So
also,
Peter,
yeah.
just as you're talking there, because you mentioned about search sets, one of the things that I'm seeing from the slide here and what we've got is what are some of the ways that not the way you create search sets, you're right, there's a ton of information on how to get that, but the typical search sets that you create, like what are some ones that people should create that they maybe not think about putting in search sets?
Well, I would say you can do different search sets. Gives you the ability to uh, do create different groups of information that is specific to a particular system. So if we talk about mechanical, you're going to have supply error and return error. So these would actually have information to say go get ducts and also find the system classification of supply error. And then that would, so you could actually apply different colors to different um, mechanical systems. For architectural, you could do floors if you wanted to. And we also use these search sets in clash detection. Um, the way I do clash detections, I don't use the typical model. I actually go and now use these search sets for that. So, for example, architectural, um, I will have some architectural um, elements, that is doors, walls, windows, and curtain walls, and does not include floors. Typically, if you really wanted to do floors, you could, but you would have a lot of false positives of information that's going through. And if you're a contractor needing to do sleeving, it might be worthwhile to create a separate set of clashes for floors so you know where they are. But typically for early on in the process, you kind of want to ignore floors because there's going to be lots of risers going through floors for duct and pipe and maybe conduit and maybe some depending on other types of systems that you're creating, you're responsible for.
Well, and exactly, and every project's a little bit different. I know we ran into the issue with this project with the ceilings being in the mechanical project,
Right.
so
Yeah.
sometimes your sets have to be a little bit different.
Yeah. So to that note, to come back to the actual directory structure, in this model, I have a NWC file from ceilings. I have one for electrical, and I have an NWC file for mechanical that we're going to be talking about and linking them in a moment in Navisworks. They're actually coming out of the actual um, MEP model. For some reason, in the Autodesk training data set, the ceilings were in the mechanical model, MEP model, not in the architectural. So, anyway, so typically you'd have ceilings and let's say interior or an architectural model, typically. But for some reason, in this data set from Autodesk, it was in the MEP model. So that's another reason why I didn't want to clash everything against mechanical. This I would want to create a search set, so I'm excluding those from that model. So in those views, so here's a typical. Um, you can go very granular with what types of clash tests you're going to create in Navisworks, but this is the clash detection dialog box. So for this demonstration, I did mech versus struck, mech versus architectural, mech versus electrical, and electrical versus structural. But essentially, with those search sets, you can go very granular if you wanted to do sanitary drainage against structural and just focus on those, you could. And it depends, the more clash tests that you set up, the more reports you got to review through. But you'd kind of want to create clash tests that are specific for the different parties for their responsible scope of work. So structural is not going to care about mechanical versus electrical or mechanical versus architectural. They're going to be cared about maybe or mechanical. And in this case, structural usually doesn't move, but uh, there is some coordination when they have to do a sleeve through a beam or through a floor. That's a structural concrete floor that they don't miss a column cap. So they're going to be involved in the process, but typically their stuff doesn't move. They're approving doing a sleeve in this location or advised, no, you can't put a sleeve there. You've got to do in the center of the beam versus, where a connection might be. So that's something that to think about. So here's an example of in this data set, there's some cable tray that I've obviously is not quite right. So now, once you created all these clash reports, what do you do with them? Well, you have to communicate them to the external parties. And so there's two routes. So we're going to talk about the Navisworks traditional approach at this point, and then we will get into how we would use BIM Track to help manage those. So the typical process would be you would export those reports to an HTML page. Then you would save the NWF file as a dated NWD file. So it's sort of a snapshot in time of what the Navisworks model at that moment in time looks like. And then you would, zip up that NWD with the reports and upload them to a share site. So if I go here, so there's the NWF file. Once we've got updated all the updates for the NWCs, we would run the clash reports, and then we would export out the reports. So in this folder here, we have the actual report files in HTML. Now Navisworks can export out different types of files. They can do an XML file, but I find that for most teams, they probably do an HTML report. And then I've saved the NWD file with a date and time. So that's a timestamp. So that when that gets shared out, everybody knows the date that NWD file was created. And it's a snapshot of time, because let's say from a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, depending on how often you want to do a clash detection update, you would then date it at that point. So that way everybody knows, okay, there's a newer version. This is quite old. It's, in the future, this will be like a couple weeks old. So that's something to consider.
Peter,
And
do you ever, sorry to interrupt it, do you ever take advantage of the automatic locking feature of the NWDs? Where, after a week or a month there, you can't open them anymore. They self-corrupt as part of this workflow, or do you find that giving them a date is enough?
I'm not sure if Navisworks can have an expiry date on an NWD file. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So I usually think that you kind of want to have a history of where the project was at what one point in time. So obviously, the model manager that's creating these might want to back up these files, and they keep the zip files around based on the date stamps, so they can go back and look at where the issues were at that moment in time. So, okay, so let's take a look at one of the typical HTML reports. Oh, let's go back here. So when you open them up, it's just an HTML page that tells you the class name. In this case, there was only one clash, but and these clashes, this has actually been grouped using the BIM Track grouping tool. And that's, by the way, that's not built into Revit. You would have to manually create groups yourself in the interface, but BIM Track has a great little tool that allows you to group clashes by certain criteria. So in this case, there's 4 clashes in that particular search set, and I grouped them to be by the current level and the nearest grid intersection. So it's G2, and it's the entry level. 01 entry level is the level name. And you can see information about that. So you typically, it's not quite showing it, but you'd have a blue and a red area. So the green item is let's go back to the green item actually in the pictures, and you can click on these when you're in the web page, and it'll pop up a little larger image. And you get some information about it, what it is, and most importantly, the element ID. And also, one thing to note as well is that for every clash test you create, the clash name, clash number 1, is going to be duplicated. There's going to be, in this case, I did 4 clash tests. There's going to be 4 clash test 1s. So if you're somehow the team externally goes and downloads them, and now how do you get that information back? How are you going to send that information? So there might be false positives as well that aren't really a clash. So if we go to the next slide here, so how do you get the feedback from all of these clashes the process and to make a, to do a full circle of all the design changes. Because typically you're going to go look at the clashes, you're going to discuss them if they are important, if they're a constructability issue. There might be lots of clashes that are not constructability issues where the sub on site can say, well, if the pipe is just touching a duct, that's okay, we'll take care of that in the field. Or you might get a false positive for a light hanging from a structural ceiling. And that's supposed to be clashing because that's where it's mounted in the model. And it's not really a clash. So you have to get that information back to the BIM coordinator to mark those as in the status of that clash to be marked as resolved or approved. And so essentially the BIM coordinator also needs to edit the NWF file with that information, so that list of clashes that aren't really clashes, that aren't important, need to be categorized, and then they need to be consolidated into a list. And then the BIM coordinator can then go back and mark all those as complete inside. And that's a tedious task. So if I go into Navisworks, I'll just pop into Navisworks here and I'll go into clash detection. So if I go to results here for, let's say, architectural, they could see a clash and they would have to change the status to approved or resolved based on the updates. So let's come back to here. So the other thing is, there's multiple clash number ones. So you have to, when you're referring to clashes, you always have to refer to the actual name of the clash test. So mechanical versus electrical clash number one, and so forth. And one way, once you start getting into multiple weeks of doing reviews, is that quite often what I do is I would only export the new and active as one set of reports, and then I would put approved, reviewed, and resolved in a separate set of reports, because that way the team only needs to look at that, and the history would be in the other reports. So then you'd be duplicating the number of HTML reports again. Now, that's one thing about BIM Track, is if you upload all the stuff into BIM Track, you don't have to do any of that. And so where do you find the clash test? So the other thing about Revit and using this is when you go back to that HTML page, let's get back to here. If we go back into the view, you'd open the HTML pages, you can copy and paste that element ID into your model, into Revit, and go find it. And so you have a rough idea where it is, but if you have a very large complex with multiple layouts, because it won't fit on a sheet. So if you're doing a factory or a large project, then you have to cut it up with a key plan. Where is this? So that's where the grid intersection is helpful when you group it. But also the grid intersection might be in here as well, and the level. And the element ID is one way that you could go to, let's say if it's light or if it's a cable tray in this case, is that you could go into the electrical model where the cable tray is, open up whatever level that it's showing on. So in this case, level 1, and do a select by element ID. And then you can kind of go find where it is. And then you can, do a little 3D view in Revit to find it. So you know how to fix it. So that's after the consultant team has gone through and said, yeah, I'm going to move my cable tray, and decided who's going to move the stuff. I mean, that's obviously the design managers that are designing the project may not be the BIM modelers. So they have to go through and review these reports, have a discussion, who's going to move what. And you might have obviously structural is probably not going to move. Architectural is probably not going to move, but mechanical and electrical have to sort of weave each other, and it's definitely ductwork and piping. have to weave each other in there without clashes. So that's something that, depending on your project, you would set up those those priorities. So yeah, that's basically, you have the level, and it is a bit slow. Now, BIM Track does have a plugin for Navisworks and for Revit that you can pull the issue up and you can quickly create a 3D view from that, and we'll kind of show that, of how quick and easy it is to find the information to resolve it. So the team members that are working in Revit, it would be great for them, because they don't necessarily, so let's continue on then. So now let's talk about the Navisworks workflow. So in BIM Track, you have a bunch of different features. So I don't know, Carl, do you want to speak to some of these features?
I can speak to some of those, but before we get into that, we did have one comment that came in, which I think is perfectly timed. Victor asks, how about that switchback feature?
Okay. Well, I've been using Navisworks for many, many years, and the switchback feature works sometimes, but it is very slow, and it's also, most of the time, most people can't get it to work. I know it's one of these features that you have to export the model to Navisworks and have the model that you've exported to Navisworks from open in Revit on the one screen and the Navisworks file in the other. Now, when you're looking at multiple consultants and you're looking at multiple versions of the files, the Navisworks file that you have open might be a consolidation of like an NWD file that has a mix of all of the models in there, and you might see a clash. And then you also have to have the full version of Navis, meaning that you have to have Navisworks Manage or Navisworks Simulate. It doesn't work with Navisworks Freedom, which a lot of people on the review side might be deciding whether this is, and looking at the reports and discussing it on the design side. So by the time you need to resolve it, it might be a totally different, it might be a couple of days before you get replies to say, here's the response of we want you to fix this in the mechanical model or fix that in the electrical model. So yes, Navisworks does have a switchback feature, but I've never been able to get it to work 100% of the time. Probably once or twice I've got it, but most people don't even bother with it because it's faster to select the element ID and copy it to the clipboard from the HTML report and go to that view and paste it in, select by element ID. So if I go into Revit here, I have Revit open.
And it's funny, as you're saying it, that was Victor's same reply, that he's tried it on his workstation, so too slow. And as you're about to show here with the
See, this is what you would do. You copy and paste the element ID and you go find it in here. So that's,
we all know how slow that process is. I believe
yeah.
the saying is, ain't nobody got time for that. So the fact that switchback is even slower than that, I think that's why Victor was a little amused with your answer was the same as his. It was a little bit slow, which is why it brings us to BIM Track.
Yeah. So one thing about BIM Track is, at that point when you export the HTML file, you wouldn't actually export an HTML. You would use the BIM Track plugin in Navisworks. So let me jump to Navisworks here. So if I cleanse out of here and I go to BIM Track, where you would publish the clashes to issues. So in BIM Track, an image like this, like a clash, is called an issue. And it has a clash name, but the clash issue number is going to be unique in BIM Track. So you won't have to worry about talking about clash number 17. You would go issue number 188. That is an issue for that. If I were to do a search for clash 17, I'd probably find a few. And there'd be probably one in every report except mechanical and electrical, because there was only 4 clashes in there. So basically you would go through the process and you would do something like this, and you would select your clash, and you're connected with the plugin to the project up on the cloud. And I would say something like this, new, and I would just publish new and active. And you have different information. So mechanical and structural, you would be setting up your disciplines here. So, okay, I want to assign mechanical and structural to this publish. And the type is going to be an issue. That's another thing to note is that you can use the BIM track to post other information besides just a clash issue. You can upload a document as an attachment to a document, and you can call it a document, or you could do a comment, or that kind of thing. So, or you could say it's a clash too. I guess that was in the default template that we opened up here. But, and then of course, at this point, um, we're not going to set a priority because there might be a lot of false positives. So as that list of people can review online. So if I switch to the actual project, I've already done this already. So this is typically what you would do. And then you direct people to the web page. So the web page is right here. So if I go to projects, you would get a login ID. And there's the project for our demo today. It's got a bit of a dashboard talking about, how many are due and that kind of thing. And we have the issues right here. Now, if I was a structural or mechanical guy, I wouldn't really care about electrical. So what I would do is filter the list. So for filtering, I could say, well, I really just want to look at mechanical versus structural at this point in time. So let's do that. So if I say apply to that, it tells me that there's 49 results. So these are 49 clashes from that, and they've been grouped. So if I click on this one, for example, I can go through and see the individual clashes. And it gives me information about it. So if you click on here, we can actually get into the clash and start looking at more information. I can bring this bigger. So all of that report information that was in the HTML, most of that is here. So you do have information of where it is, modify, so you can annotate, you can comment on it, you can do attachments and so forth. So this list would be something that multiple people can log in, start looking at their issues, and find things that aren't really an issue. So if I search for mechanical versus electrical versus structural, for example, and we'll go apply. You can also search for your discipline if you want to just look for electrical. That's another option. And you can do a title. You can search many different ways and filter. So if I'm going to display all of them, and I'll do apply. So the results was 49 results. So if I kind of look at some of these, let's take a look at this one here. Now, BIM Track also has the ability to view the image online in 3D, because part of the process is that the viewer does have IFC files that are exported, part of the Revit plugin. So if I go back to Revit here, and I have a BIM Track plugin, there's a publish button. So for publishing, in this case, if I cancel out of here for a minute and scroll back up, I've got 3 different views here: the ceilings, the electrical, and the mechanical. I would be publishing these up to the cloud as an IFC file with the publish command. So right here, I'd go select on the views that I want to publish. So if I wanted to update the mechanical up in BIM Track, so these would be the same views that I'd be exporting out to Navisworks and then also doing a publish up to BIM Track. So by doing the publish command, hit publish now. The other thing is that BIM Track does have the schedule command that you could schedule BIM Track to open up the model and publish at a certain time of night, like after hours at night. And your machine would have to be on, but it would fire up Revit, open up the model, and actually publish it on a certain schedule, so you don't necessarily have to do it. You can also publish sheets as well. So I don't know if there's any sheets in this model, but we can talk about that a little bit later. And you can overlay the sheet in the model. So let's cancel this and go back to this issue. So if I say open in the viewer, it's going to open up structural and electrical. So let's take a look at that. So we can see here that it's processing and it's going to be creating a 3D view. And now we can look at this. So it does have a bit of a different interface. So I can see that, well, this is a pendant light. This is not an issue. I don't need to worry about this. So I could go and edit this one now and come down here and say that the status is approved. Or actually, I would say closed, because it's not an issue that we need to worry about. So if I go save now, and I go back to issues, let's go back to issues. And so my filtering is on. I've got this one. The other thing you can do is you can say, well, I only want to look at in progress, and I only want to look at open and reopen. So now when I filter it, if I apply that filter, I'm going to be 49.8 results. Or 47. Okay, so anyway, so at this point, we know that I'm only going to be looking at active views. So as soon as an issue gets closed by another team member, that whole consolidating a list of non-constructible, non-real issues slowly get, obviously the first time you publish it, you know, a BIM manager can go through and each company and start looking at them and closing them to whittle down the important ones. The other thing is you can look at the priorities, and as you're navigating through the issues online, and you don't need a Revit license to do this at all. You just need access to the license. So if I'm looking at this, oh, this one looks pretty interesting. Okay, that looks like a, you know, that column is not going to move, and it's an electrical light that may not be that might not be a constructability issue, because the person that's installing the light is obviously going to move it. But the question would be asked, well, did the electrical engineer, when he laid out his lights, did he have in Revit, did he have the structural columns linked in? Because obviously you would know that he'd have to adjust his lighting. So again, depending on whether you want to decide this is an issue or not, you can go ahead and mark it as closed or whatever. So anyway, so that's most of the issues. If we get down here, we might have some cable tray in here somewhere. Anyway, so that is the interface. So the other thing is that in the viewer, you have the ability to set up a view and you can save a view. So this is the cable tray versus mechanical and structural. So, and this is a view that I saved, and it's got some colors. So right here, it's, you know, that's kind of like that screenshot I showed. So there's some mechanical and electrical, and you can apply colors to this if you want. So if I went to electrical and I change that to be, that's already red, but if I went to mechanical, I could change the colors for mechanical to be sort of like a green color. Apply. And then structural, I can see that structural is on. And we can also see the versions. So as the models progress in the Navisworks file to create the issues, the IFC files would progress as well. And so you start seeing versions of when they were last published as well. So if I go to structural here, and we'll change the color to a bit of a brownish color, which would be, let's see here, let's find it. Well, I'll just pick a different color. Apply. There's a purple color. So now you can kind of see more information about it. And in fact, if I go back to the issue, we can bring that issue into Revit and look at it. So if I go to Revit with the plugin, so this whole list of issues now is up in the cloud. So the plugin in Revit and the plugin in Navisworks can reproduce these views. So that was electrical versus mechanical, right? I believe that's what that was. So this is the one.
Inside of Revit.
So here it is. So if I open this one, so there's the clash, and then we can see all of the different groups for the cable tray. So then we added this view from BIM Track and let's go to Revit. So the number is 141. It's also mechanical versus electrical. So if I go to Revit and I'm in the model, so if I go to any view really, so if I go to power and I close all these views down, so if I go to view, close hidden, I've got no views up. If I pull up BIM Track, so BIM Track has a plugin. So in this case, I need to filter. So I'm going to go to the grouping, and I'm going to pick mechanical versus electrical. Just go apply. So there's our one issue. So at this point, I want to find this exact view. So if I go view and model, it's going to create a 3D view and it's going to section cut it to that level. Now this is telling me that, hey, it's going to have multiple instances of the clash sphere in the same place. So just click OK. So if we look at it now, we can see here the model. And I do have a view template to help speed things up. So if I go into down here to view template, I have none, but I have already created a view template called Clash 3D View. And in there, I've applied a couple filters. So if I look at filters here, I've gone through and I've created filters for different items to apply different colors to the view. So that'll be in the handout how to do that. So there we have some colors. And we can also turn the clash spheres off, I believe, right here, and hide all spheres. So now we can, this is actually a section box. So we can grab this and pull it, make it a little bit bigger for a bit more context. So there's close to a staircase. And if you wanted to turn on levels, you could too. So you could go into the view template and apply some levels to it. So if I go to annotation, and I think levels may be on. Well, it looks like the cut's not there to see the actual levels because it's so small. But levels are on, so if I made this big enough, we would actually get to a different area. So there's the cable tray. It's just below the second floor. And yeah, so now where do you find this cable tray? So if I tab select it, so if I went to the power plan, and now if I go to WT, I've got the floor plan here. And I'll just sort of shrink up the viewer. Well, maybe we'll turn that off. We want to find that cable tray. So if I'm tab select it. All right, so I've got it selected over here. So I can kind of see that I've got it selected here and I've got the entire cable tray. So it looks like the problem is probably right here. So that is the problem. So now I could go in plan, start modifying this and changing maybe grab this and slide it up a little bit to avoid a clash.
So as you can see how Peter's showing this here, this is one of his tips and tricks. But you can certainly see how with the use of the BIM Track add-in and the way the issues are shared in the cloud, that anyone can access that, be taken directly to the issue. we can see how we very quickly created that 3D view with context, and then using Peter's trick here of using the plan view and the 3D view, being able to tab through. Imagine how much quicker that is than we had that little discussion earlier about using switchback and trying to be able to do this with just going back and forth and finding the issue through, spreadsheets or what have you with Navisworks, how much this is going to speed up your workflow. And as we're getting near the top of the hour, I think this is probably a good point that if you want to wrap up with the tips and tricks part, Peter, I know that's the part people are looking for before we get into questions.
So if we go to back to my presentation here. So there's the class grouper for inside the BIM Track. So in Navisworks, after you've created clashes, it's just going to say clash 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I go switch back to Navisworks really quickly, which is right here. Once you create the clashes the first time, so if I just go back to save viewpoints, and I go to clash to BIM Track, if I didn't have any groups, I would go to BIM Track and go to class group. So basically you'd be selecting all of your clashes, and you sort by level and then by grid intersection. And then I could remove the groups, and you click group, and then that way it will create those groups that you publish to BIM Track to see to cut down, because obviously you may have multiple clashes that are the same thing. So that one cable tray item was hitting multiple items, so that's why a clash group is very useful. So the other thing, going back to the presentation. So yeah, you can get reports of, as you start to see reports, you can see the number of clashes that got resolved, and you can start getting charts from the web page. So that's in the area of where we go back to.
And when it gets into the things like the reports and the metrics, these are the type of things that we can cover in the demo after.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of reports that you can create and export as well.
But yeah, it's a great feature because, again, unlike the HTML report that you're working with from pulling from Navisworks, there's all the metadata from the project. And here we're seeing the nice little 3D box that we were able to create that we saw live, thanks to Peter in the demonstration, and how quick that was bringing it through. The other ability to see the add-ins. And in this particular example, we saw the add-in inside of Revit and the add-in inside of Navisworks. One of the nice things about BIM Track is that the add-ins aren't just Autodesk products. ArchiCAD, Tekla, we have one for BricsCAD, so really are platform agnostic, and that allows you to keep your workflow the way you want it to be, meaning that you don't have to use just an Autodesk product. Whatever your team is working in, you can move in. So that's a nice thing as well.
One other thing that everybody should know that I didn't talk about is this button here, which is the sync clash status. So as people are on the web page, in the portal, on the project in BIM Track, and they're marking them as closed, as soon as you click this, after the week, the BIM manager would open up the Navisworks model. They go here, and they say synchronize status. And it'll actually go and mark that issue in the clash in the actual Navisworks model and change the status to closed. So that's how then when you redo the next export, so if I'm going to Navisworks really quickly here, which would be this one, that would be synchronized status. I don't know if this is live. I don't know how long this will take. Let's say I'm going to do.
You don't want to do that live.
Okay, so
but Peter's
I know that.
Right. The idea and the way that it works is when you're working inside of Navisworks, you have the idea. You can either approve or resolve. Everyone has a different workflow for when they're doing that. And so when you push the clashes to issues, it takes the status from Navisworks and you can push it into BIM Track.
Well, I just did it. It wasn't that fast because this is a small project, so we did it.
And so as we see in reverse, it does the opposite. If you close that issue inside of BIM Track, you can see that it will put it through as approved or resolved. You get to choose in the other end. So we have that functionality. So it doesn't happen automatically. And the reason why it doesn't happen automatically is some people use Navisworks as a vessel. They create the clashes, they put the clashes in BIM Track, and they do everything inside of BIM Track. With Peter's workflow, where they're continue to use the Navisworks model, and they want to make sure that those issues are closed when they have next week's NWD and the NWD after that. This is a really handy feature because, as Peter said, it allows you to push that stuff that's been closed outside of Navisworks back in to get that closed functionality. So I'm glad you brought that up, Peter.
Yeah. So that kind of avoids the whole process of creating a list of non-constructible, let's close these issues, not focus on them, and not have them exported. So
no list, and we don't have to check it twice.
Yeah. So the other thing is the automated tasks features, where that'll actually go in the background and do your publish of the IFCs. And also the sheets. That's one feature we didn't show, is the sheets. Maybe we'll take a moment and show that in the actual application, which would be right here. So if I go back to the viewer, and let's look at architectural. We have sheets here. So we do have an architectural sheet. So we'll do first floor plan. We'll turn that on. And this is part of the publishing process. So this is a 3D view, and I can do go to top here, and I can adjust the clipping plane to see that things are lining up, and I can get your grid interface information as well. So that's a handy tool to see. These would be sheets that actually have the annotation objects as well. So, if you've got notes and dimensions on there, or in this case, room locations, you can kind of see that. So that is a very handy feature as well.
And the nice thing about this, as Peter is showing, is that if you have a sub, an owner, a trade that's not using Navisworks or Revit, they don't need access to those products. They can overlay the two here, and we call hypermodeling, and see all that content in a very helpful way without needing to know how to use Navisworks or Revit.
And of course, on the BIM Track site, you have the ability to add all kinds of custom fields and modify the templates to suit your workflow, to tweak it for your type of project. I just showed that feature of overlaying a PDF drawing, and BIM Track does come with a PDF driver that you would actually install on your computer. And as you do the publish process, and if you pick sheets, it'll do the IFC export, and it'll do the PDF and upload to BIM Track as well. Essentially, it doesn't replace Navisworks, because BIM Track doesn't actually do the clash detection, but it augments BIM Track to facilitate people automatically seeing the clashes. They don't need to open up Navisworks Freedom. They don't need to upload and download reports. And then also another issue sometimes I've seen on projects is with that traditional workflow is somebody's looking at an older version of the model because they say, well, I don't need to go look at that file. I've got the one from last week. And then they start talking about looking at a model and looking at a clash and pointing it out and say, well, that was fixed this past week. Did you download the latest model? Oh, no, I haven't. But in case of BIM Track, the team's going to be uploading those things and resolving them. So if he's just looking at it BIM Track, he does his particular filter, and he'll see, oh, that's been closed. And he could actually go and filter the closed one and find that, oh, yeah, this has been marked closed. There's some comments. And another thing that's very helpful for people when they go on vacation and they come back, they don't have to know, well, what is the latest Navisworks model? When was it published? What do I have to download? No, it's already in BIM Track. It's all up to date. And it's like sort of one source of truth going to the web page. So there's kind of what we talked about right here, all these features. So it's one master list updated. And I think that's the tips and tricks. Oh, yes, real quick. In Navisworks, when you're creating the images, if you go into the options, you go and you turn down your transparency to 0.95, you'll still be able to have dimming on and see the information. So that's kind of like when you're looking at a clash, it grabs the clash detection image. So dimming is in Navisworks. When we go into clash detection, if I just sort of slide this over to the side here a little bit, and if I go to electrical, mechanical versus electrical, and I click on this clash, so this is the dimming feature. So dimming is this guy here. You can also set it to hide others, so you only see the clash. But dimming kind of gives you a little bit of a context depending on what it is. So that's the dimming feature. So you can crank that grayscale down with this feature here. The other thing is, if you ever get into Navisworks and you're importing IFC files, so when you're looking at a construction workflow like I do, we might get an IFC file from the structural fabricator and from Tekla. They export an IFC file quite often for us, and we bring it into Navisworks, and we can overlay it against mechanical and see the nuts and bolts and actually what they've actually decided to change the structural design for. So sometimes you have to make sure that your IFC is bringing in everything. I found if you may change it from, what was this one, modern or to legacy, you need to set it to legacy.
Correct. That's right.
So, and then for performance, you could also go into the model performance here, and I usually like to tell people to close NWC and MBD on load. So if you download the files and you stick them on the network, and you want to open it, it will unlock the files after you open it. So if you're in the process of working on an NWF file, and somebody wants to update the NWC file for you, they wouldn't be able to overwrite it unless you close the NWF file. So if you had this on, they would be able to overwrite it. No, you would still have to close and reopen the file to get the update link to be showing. But anyway, the optimize and load is another way as well to sort of build a bit of a cache on your local drive. So that's another tip. Here's the tip that I showed before about creating a view template and showing the visual graphics filters override. For this, you would actually do need to create a filter for that particular category. So if I show that really quick, go to Navisworks here. If I go to filters, so it'd be view, and it'd be filters. And if I look at I think Mech was one of them. So Mech is the one that I used. The other one was cable tray. So I created cable tray, and all it is looking at is cable tray. There's no options here in terms of filtering rules. So it's just select the two categories and apply that to your view. So if I went to here and I went to the visibility graphics of this one, so that is this filter here. And we look at the filter. I just applied it to the view. So I just went add, grabbed it, threw it in here, and then you apply your colors here. So in this case, a pattern, I've just said I changed it to solid and then red, solid and then red. And then the lines I made black. I just did a solid black so you see a nice outline of the edges. And that's essentially it for that. So,
all right. I think we're just hitting here at the top of the hour.
Okay, that's it for our.
And it's you got to the last. That was the last tip, I believe. We talked about putting the information into the tips and tricks, and I just want to thank everyone for coming here. And I was going to ask if there was any follow-up questions. I know that we've seen a few questions come through in the comments. I've been answering it the best I can as we go through. We're going to be heading right after this over into the expo, so you can certainly stop by the expo and ask any questions and see more detail about BIM Track specifically. And if you just want to hit one more slide there, Peter. There we go. The big thank you slide. I really do thank very much you, Peter, for coming and walking through and showing us your workflow. I know a lot of people use Navisworks, but it's good to see someone that uses it from the field and the way that they use it. If you need contact to get in touch with myself or Peter, our information's there. And if you just one last time, Peter, hit that slide. Thank you very much. And if you do want more information, by all means, come see us in the expo, but you can also go to bimtrack.co. And if you're looking for more questions, be sure to hit up Ahmed. He's the man that will get you set up on the sales and account side. And with that, I once again want to thank everyone for coming. Peter, any last words?
Well, just maybe tell people how to get to the expo. So on the Hop-In main page, you go back from the main stage, and you'll see the expo as an icon on the left side. That you click on that, and that's where Carl and I will be. I'll probably join it for a bit to answer questions. And thanks for everybody attending.
Thanks very much for that, Peter. And there's also a link to the BIM Track Expo in the comments. And with that, thank you, everyone.